Imagine waking up, not to an alarm, not to the buzz of a phone on your nightstand, not to traffic sounds or the glow of a screen, but to the first light of dawn, creeping through a small window in a mud brick house. The air is cool, scented with smoke from last night's fire, and the earthy smell of the Nile River just beyond your door. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the low murmur of voices, the soft clucking of chickens, the rhythmic sound of someone grinding grain. This is morning in ancient Egypt, around 2500 BCE. This is how humans woke up for thousands of years after we stopped being hunter-gatherers and started building cities, planting crops, writing things down, and creating what we now call civilization. It's about 4,500 years ago. You're living in a small town along the Nile, or maybe in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, or perhaps in the Indus Valley, or early China. The details vary, but the fundamental shift is the same. Your ancestors stopped moving with the herds and the seasons. They settled down. They built permanent homes. They domesticated plants and animals. They created surplus food, which meant not everyone had to spend all day finding something to eat, and that surplus changed everything. It created hierarchies, specialists, cities, writing, taxes, slavery, art, monumental architecture, organized religion, law codes, and daily routines that would have been unrecognizable to your Paleolithic ancestors. So here's the question that archaeologists, historians, and anthropologists keep circling back to. What did ordinary people actually do all day in these early civilizations? We have the dramatic stuff: pharaohs building pyramids, kings waging wars, priests performing elaborate rituals. But what about everyone else? The farmers, the bakers, the potters, the weavers, the laborers. The people who made up 95% of the population? What was a typical day like for them? The answer is going to surprise you. Because despite all the grand temples and written records and monumental art, daily life in early civilizations was in many ways just as physically demanding as it had been for hunter-gatherers, maybe more so. But it was also more structured, more predictable, and in some ways more constrained. People worked harder, but they worked on schedules. They had less freedom, but more security. They had to answer to kings and gods and tax collectors, but they also had bread ovens and beer and the knowledge that the harvest, if the gods were kind, would come every single year. If you're listening to this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. Maybe subscribe and let me know where you are right now and what time it is. I always check the comments and it's fascinating. Someone in Tokyo at sunrise, someone in London at lunch, someone in California at midnight, all drifting off to the same stories about our shared human past. The shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture, what scholars call the Neolithic Revolution, was one of the most profound transformations in human history. It happened independently in several places around the world between about 10,000 and 5,000 years ago: the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, the Yellow River Valley in China, Mesoamerica, the Andes. Each region had its own timeline, its own crops, its own domesticated animals. But the pattern was similar. People stopped following wild herds and started managing their food sources. They planted wheat and barley, or rice and millet, or corn and beans. They penned sheep and goats, or pigs and cattle, or llamas and alpacas. And once you're tied to fields and flocks, you can't just pack up and move when the seasons change. You have to stay put. You have to build permanent houses. You have to store your surplus. You have to defend your land. And slowly, over generations, villages grew into towns, towns into cities, and cities into civilizations. By 3000 BCE, the world had several thriving civilizations. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians were building ziggurats and inventing cuneiform writing. In Egypt, the Old Kingdom was beginning, and the first pyramids would soon rise. In the Indus Valley, cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were being laid out in precise grids with sophisticated drainage systems. In China, the first dynasties were emerging. These weren't simple farming communities anymore. These were complex societies with kings, priests, scribes, artisans, merchants, soldiers, and a whole lot of farmers and laborers whose daily work made everything else possible. So let's walk through a day together. Not a dramatic day with a royal ceremony or a military campaign, but a regular day. An ordinary day about 4,500 years ago when someone in an early civilization woke up to the dawn and lived their life in ways that were both utterly foreign and strangely familiar to how we live ours. Because understanding how our ancestors actually spent their time doesn't just teach us about the past, it raises uncomfortable questions about the present. About what we've gained with progress and what we might have lost. About whether working in fields from dawn to dusk is better or worse than walking a few hours a day to gather food. About whether civilization was a step forward for everyone, or just for some. Let's start at the beginning, with that moment when gray light filters into a mud brick house and another day in ancient civilization begins. You're not waking up to an alarm. There are no alarms. But there's also no freedom to sleep until you feel like getting up. The fields are waiting. The animals need feeding. The work needs doing. Your day is not governed by your own rhythms anymore. It's governed by the crops, the seasons, the demands of whoever owns the land you work on, and increasingly, the commands of people in positions of power. Consciousness returns slowly, pulled back by the growing light and the sounds of the household stirring. The first thing you notice is the smell. Smoke. Always smoke. From the cooking fire that's been banked overnight and is now being fed new fuel. Mixed with that is the smell of bodies, animals, stored grain, and if you're lucky, bread baking. The second thing you notice is the space. You're not sleeping out in the open under the stars. You're inside a structure with walls and a roof. This represents a fundamental shift from how your ancestors lived. This house, however humble, is property. It's fixed. It's yours. Or more likely, it belongs to whoever you owe your labor to. The walls are mud brick. The floor is packed earth, maybe covered with reed mats. There might be one room, maybe two if you're relatively well off. Your family sleeps together, along with some of the smaller animals. Goats, chickens, maybe a pig. The larger animals, if you have any, are penned outside. There are no windows in the modern sense, just small openings near the roof to let smoke out and a little light in. The door is a simple wooden frame covered with a mat or animal hide. Privacy is not a concept that exists in the way we think of it. Your family, your neighbors, your community, everyone lives closely, intimately, with few barriers between one household and another. Someone is already awake, usually the women. They're the ones who tend the fire, who begin preparing the morning meal, who get the children up and moving. Sleep in early civilizations was probably similar to sleep in the Paleolithic, segmented with periods of wakefulness during the night. But now, those wakeful periods might be spent checking on stored grain, making sure the animals are secure, listening for sounds of raiders or thieves. Security is maintained not through constant vigilance by rotating band members, but through walls, locks, community patrols, and increasingly, the authority of local officials and soldiers. As the fire builds, more people begin to stir. Children first, then the men, then the elders if there are any in the household. In civilizations, unlike hunter-gatherer bands, not everyone survives to old age. Disease is more common when people live in close quarters. Epidemics sweep through settlements. Parasites thrive in irrigation canals, but those who do survive might be valued for their knowledge, though they're often unable to contribute physical labor and become dependents on the younger generation. You stretch, work out the stiffness from sleeping on a thin mat on the hard floor, and attend to basic needs. If you're in a city, there might be a designated waste area, maybe even a primitive sewer system like in the Indus Valley cities. If you're in a village, you simply go outside to a pit or a field. Hygiene is minimal. Water is precious and usually reserved for drinking and irrigation, not bathing. You might wash your face and hands if water is plentiful, but full body washing is rare. The smell of unwashed human bodies is constant, normal, unremarkable. Someone, usually the head of the household, or whoever has to report to the overseer, steps outside to check the morning. What's the weather like? Are the fields dry or wet? Is it the season for planting, growing, or harvest? Are the animals healthy? What needs to be done today? This morning assessment is crucial, but it's different from the Paleolithic version. Instead of reading signs about where animals might be or which plants are ready to gather, you're reading signs about your own domesticated world. Do the crops need watering? Are the sheep showing signs of disease? Is it time to repair the irrigation ditch? Has the tax collector's representative left a mark on your door indicating an upcoming assessment? As more people wake and gather around the fire, there's conversation. Quiet at first, then building. But the content is different from a hunter-gatherer band's morning talk. There's planning, yes, but it's more constrained. You can't just decide to go hunting in a different valley or move camp to follow a herd. You have obligations, debts, quotas. If you're a farmer, which most people in early civilizations were, you owe a portion of your harvest to the landowner, the temple, or the king. If you're a laborer, you owe your time. If you're a craftsperson, you owe your products. The freedom to simply go where the food is has been replaced by the obligation to produce what's demanded. Children are already moving around, but they're not just playing freely like Paleolithic children. By the time they're 5 or 6, they have chores. Small children might help with simple tasks like gathering eggs, feeding chickens, or carrying water. Older children work alongside adults, learning skills through observation and practice, just like their ancestors did. But now the skills are specialized. How to plow, how to weave, how to shape clay, how to scribe if you're lucky enough to be in a scribe family. Play still happens, but it's squeezed into the margins. Before we get to the main work of the day, there's one more crucial task that would have been unthinkable to a Paleolithic ancestor: breakfast. Not just eating whatever food is available, but preparing a meal from stored ingredients using techniques that require fire, tools, and time. Let's talk about food in early civilizations, because it's both familiar and strange. The first thing to understand is that agriculture did not, paradoxically, lead to better nutrition for most people. Hunter-gatherers had varied diets. They ate dozens of different plants, multiple types of meat, fish, nuts, berries, roots. Early farmers, by contrast, became dependent on a small number of staple crops. In the Middle East, it was wheat and barley. In China, rice and millet. In Mesoamerica, corn, beans, and squash. These crops provided calories, yes, but not always complete nutrition. Skeletal remains from early agricultural societies show more signs of malnutrition, dental problems, and shorter stature than remains from hunter-gatherer populations. People were working harder and eating worse. But they were eating more reliably. That's the trade-off. Hunter-gatherers might feast after a successful hunt, then go days with little food. Farmers, if the harvest was good, had a steady supply of grain that could be stored for months. So breakfast in your ancient household is probably based on grain. If you're in Egypt, it's bread and beer. Yes, beer for breakfast. Not because ancient people were alcoholics, but because beer was a way of making grain more digestible and safer to drink than water, which might be contaminated. The bread is coarse, made from emmer wheat or barley, ground on a stone saddle quern. The grinding is done by hand, usually by women, and it's back-breaking work that leaves grit from the grinding stones in the flour. That grit wears down teeth, which is why dental problems are rampant in agricultural societies. The woman of the household, or a daughter, has already been up for an hour grinding grain, mixing it with water, shaping it into loaves, and placing it in or near the fire to bake. The result is a dense, heavy bread, nothing like modern fluffy loaves. It's filling but tough to chew and not particularly tasty. The beer is thick, soupy, made from partially baked bread that's been crumbled into water and left to ferment. It's nutritious, mildly alcoholic, and everyone drinks it. Men, women, children. If you're in Mesopotamia, your breakfast might also include some onions or garlic, maybe dates if it's the right season, perhaps some fish if you live near water. If you're relatively well off, you might have some cheese or yogurt from your goats or cows. If you're poor, it's just bread and water, maybe some thin porridge. Meat is rare for ordinary people. The animals are more valuable alive, producing milk, wool, labor, or offspring. You only eat meat at festivals, after sacrifices, or when an animal dies or is too old to be useful. This is a fundamental shift from the Paleolithic, where meat was a regular part of the diet whenever hunts succeeded. As you eat your breakfast, you're sitting on the floor or on a low stool. There are no tables in the modern sense. You eat with your hands, maybe using a piece of bread to scoop up porridge or sauce. Utensils are minimal, a few clay or wooden bowls, perhaps a knife. Everything is shared. Individual plates and portions are not a thing. The meal is accompanied by conversation, but it's not leisurely. There's a sense of urgency. The sun is rising. The day's work is waiting. And if you don't meet your obligations, there will be consequences. Not starvation necessarily, but punishment. Reduced rations, physical discipline, loss of what little status you have. This is the reality of life in early civilizations for most people. You are not free. Let's talk about work, because this is where the day really begins, and this is where the difference between Paleolithic life and civilized life becomes starkest. If you're a farmer, and again, most people were, your work is dictated by the agricultural calendar, planting season, growing season, harvest season. Each requires different tasks, all of them physically demanding. It's early spring, planting season. You're waking up to a day that will be spent in the fields from sunrise until the light fails. The work is repetitive, exhausting, and absolutely critical. If the planting isn't done right, if the seeds aren't sown at the right time in the right way, the harvest will fail and people will starve. You gather your tools. A wooden plow if you're lucky enough to have access to one, and to draft animals to pull it. More likely, you have a simple digging stick or hoe. You might have a bronze blade if you live in a society that's mastered metalworking, but bronze is expensive and often reserved for weapons and tools for the elite. Most farmers work with wood, stone, and bone tools not that different from what their Paleolithic ancestors used, but the work itself is completely different. You're not tracking animals or foraging for wild plants. You're breaking the earth, creating furrows, placing seeds at regular intervals, covering them, moving to the next row. Over and over and over. Your back aches, your hands blister, the sun beats down. There are no breaks except for brief moments to drink water or eat a bit of bread. You work alongside your family, your neighbors, maybe alongside people who've been conscripted for labor on the temple's fields or the king's estates. In Mesopotamia, this is called corvée labor. In Egypt, it's part of the pharaoh's right to demand work from his subjects. You might spend weeks every year working not on your own fields, but on public projects, irrigation canals, temples, palaces, pyramids. This is not a choice. This is an obligation enforced by the state. The fields you're planting stretch as far as you can see in some areas. In others, they're small plots, squeezed between other farms. Either way, they're divided, owned, controlled. In the Fertile Crescent, in Egypt, in the Indus Valley, land ownership has become a defining feature of society. Some land belongs to temples, some to the king, some to wealthy individuals. Some might be owned communally by a village, but that's becoming rarer. If you're a free farmer, you might own a small plot. More likely, you're a tenant, working someone else's land in exchange for a share of the harvest. Or you're a laborer, working for rations and a place to sleep. Or, in the worst case, you're a slave, working because you have no choice, having been captured in war, or born into servitude, or sold by your family to pay off debt. Slavery is a feature of early civilizations that didn't exist, or existed in very different forms, among hunter-gatherers. When everyone's survival depends on mobility and cooperation, enslaving people doesn't make sense. But when you have fields that need constant labor, when you have monumental building projects, when you have a surplus that allows some people to live off the work of others, slavery becomes economically viable. And it's everywhere in the ancient world. Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, the Indus Valley. Slaves and near slaves doing the hardest, most dangerous work. As you plant, as you hoe, as you clear weeds, you might sing. Work songs are common across early civilizations. They serve multiple purposes. They help coordinate labor when groups are working together. They make the time pass. They connect you to tradition, to the songs your parents sang, your grandparents. The lyrics might be about the gods, about the harvest, about love or loss, or they might just be rhythmic syllables that match the rhythm of the work. By midday, the heat is intense. In Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Indus Valley, summer temperatures can soar above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. There's little shade in the fields. You might pause under a tree if there is one, or rig up a simple shelter from reeds or cloth. You eat a small meal, more bread, maybe some onions, possibly some dried fish or a handful of dates. You drink water, if it's available, or more beer. Then back to work. The afternoon stretches on. The sun moves slowly across the sky. Your muscles scream. Your mind goes numb. This is not the varied, engaging work of tracking an animal or foraging for dozens of different plants. This is monotonous, grinding labor, but it's also necessary. It's the price of civilization. The surplus that allows scribes to write, priests to pray, artists to create, soldiers to fight, and kings to rule. That surplus comes from this, from your sweat, from your aching back, from your calloused hands. When the sun finally begins to set, you make your way back to your village or neighborhood. You're exhausted. You're covered in dust and sweat. Your feet hurt from walking on uneven ground all day. But there's still work to be done. The animals need tending. The fire needs feeding. Food needs preparing. Tools need repairing. If you're a woman, you've spent the day doing work that's no less demanding than the men's fieldwork, just different. You've been grinding grain, an hours-long process. You've been weaving, which requires skill, concentration, and strong hands. You've been making pots, shaping clay, drying it in the sun. You've been tending the household garden where vegetables and herbs grow. You've been caring for children, cooking, cleaning, hauling water from the river or well. The division of labor in early civilizations is more rigid than it was for hunter-gatherers. Men do fieldwork, construction, metalworking, soldiering. Women do food processing, textile production, childcare, household management. There are exceptions, but they're rare. Your role is defined by your gender, your family, your position in the social hierarchy. If you're a child, you're learning your future role by doing simplified versions of adult work. Boys follow their fathers to the fields or workshops. Girls stay with their mothers, learning to grind, weave, and cook. Formal education is rare and reserved for the elite. Scribal schools in Mesopotamia and Egypt train boys, never girls, to read and write. But for 95% of the population, education is informal, practical, and focused on the skills needed to survive and fulfill your obligations. By the time you're 10 or 12, you're doing adult work, maybe not at full capacity, but close. By the time you're 15, you're considered an adult. If you're a girl, you're likely married, or about to be, married off, to create alliances between families, or to consolidate property. If you're a boy, you're working full-time, and marriage will come soon, arranged by your parents based on economic and social considerations, not love. Now, not everyone is a farmer. Early civilizations created specialists, people who don't grow their own food but are supported by the surplus others produce. Let's talk about what their days looked like. If you're a potter, you wake up to a day of working with clay. This is skilled labor. You need to know where to find good clay, how to process it, remove impurities, get it to the right consistency. You need to know how to shape it, either by hand, by coiling, or on a potter's wheel if your civilization has developed that technology. The wheel is a game changer, allowing for faster, more uniform production. But it also requires strength and practice. You spend hours at the wheel, shaping vessel after vessel. Bowls, jars, storage containers, cooking pots. The work is repetitive, but requires constant attention. A moment's distraction, and the pot collapses. Once shaped, the pots need to dry slowly to avoid cracking. Then they're fired in a kiln, a carefully controlled process that can turn a whole batch to rubble if the temperature isn't right. You're not working alone. Pottery production is often a family or workshop affair. Children help with simple tasks. Women might do the decorating, painting geometric patterns or images of animals and gods. Men handle the heavy work and the firing. The finished pots are traded or sold, providing you with grain, meat, cloth, whatever you need, but don't produce yourself. You're part of an economy now, not just a subsistence community. If you're a metal worker, you're even more specialized. Copper and bronze working requires knowledge that's almost magical to ordinary people. You know how to find ore, how to smelt it, how to cast it into molds, how to hammer it into tools and weapons. You work with fire at temperatures far higher than cooking fires. You have access to resources that are valuable and often controlled by elites. Your products, bronze axes, knives, spearheads, jewelry, are prized and often reserved for the wealthy and powerful. You might work directly for a temple or palace, producing goods on demand in exchange for rations and protection. Or you might work independently, trading your products for what you need. Either way, your knowledge gives you status, but it also makes you dependent. You can't eat bronze. You need farmers to feed you. If you're a weaver, and this is usually women's work, you spend your days transforming raw wool or flax into thread, then thread into cloth. This is time-consuming, skilled labor. Spinning thread requires a spindle and hours of careful work. Weaving on a loom requires strength, coordination, and patience. The simplest cloth might take days to produce. Fine, decorated cloth might take weeks. The finished fabric is valuable. It's used for clothing, of course, but also for trade, for tribute, for gifts to the gods. In some civilizations, cloth is a form of currency. Your labor as a weaver is not just making something useful. You're creating wealth. If you're a scribe, you're part of a tiny, powerful elite. Literacy is rare in early civilizations. In Mesopotamia, maybe 1% of the population can read and write cuneiform. In Egypt, literacy in hieroglyphics and hieratic script is even rarer. Your day is spent not in physical labor, but in mental work. You keep records, inventory of grain in the temple storehouses, lists of workers and their rations, tax assessments, legal contracts, royal decrees, religious texts. You're the memory of the civilization, the one who makes administration possible. Without writing, without scribes, complex societies can't function. You can't coordinate large projects, collect taxes, maintain law and order, or preserve knowledge across generations. Scribe training is rigorous. Years of copying texts, memorizing signs, learning mathematics, studying the classics. In Mesopotamia, you practice on clay tablets, writing with a reed stylus. In Egypt, you use papyrus and ink, or practice on broken pottery shards called ostraca. The work is tedious, but prestigious. Scribes are respected, well-fed, exempt from manual labor. But you're also accountable. Mistakes can have serious consequences. Recording the wrong number in a tax account could get you punished. Your day might involve sitting in a temple or palace office, surrounded by tablets or scrolls, carefully inscribing information. Or you might travel with officials, recording transactions, taking dictation, witnessing agreements. You're the interface between the illiterate masses and the literate elite. If you're a priest, your day is structured around ritual. Early civilizations are deeply religious. The gods control everything: the weather, the harvest, victory and war, disease and health, fertility and death. Keeping the gods happy is not optional. It's essential for survival. You wake early to perform the morning rituals. In Egypt, this might involve opening the shrine, washing and dressing the statue of the god, offering food and incense. In Mesopotamia, it's similar, elaborate ceremonies designed to feed and honor the gods. These aren't symbolic gestures. In the minds of ancient people, the gods literally inhabit the statues and consume the offerings, at least the spiritual essence of them. The physical food is later distributed to temple staff and sometimes to the public. As a priest, you're not just performing rituals, you're managing a complex institution. Temples in early civilizations are economic powerhouses. They own land, employ workers, collect taxes, store surplus, lend grain at interest, fund building projects. You might spend part of your day overseeing workers in the temple fields, part of it receiving offerings from worshippers, part of it studying religious texts or teaching younger priests. You're well-fed, well-clothed, and powerful, but you're also under pressure. If the harvest fails, if the river doesn't flood, If disease strikes, people will question whether the rituals were performed correctly, whether you angered the gods. Your status is high, but it's conditional on maintaining cosmic order. Let's talk about what happens when the workday ends, because even in early civilizations, there was something resembling leisure time, though it looked very different from Paleolithic leisure. You return home as the sun sets. In cities, the streets are narrow, winding, unpaved. Houses are packed close together, often sharing walls. There's noise everywhere. Voices, animals, the clang of metalworking, the creak of cartwheels, the smell is intense. Human waste, animal waste, smoke, cooking food, unwashed bodies, rotting garbage. Sanitation in early cities is minimal. Waste is thrown into the streets or into designated pits. In the Indus Valley cities, there are sophisticated drainage systems, but even there, the smell would be overwhelming by modern standards. You enter your home, the fire is burning. Someone has prepared the evening meal. It's probably similar to breakfast and lunch. Bread, porridge, maybe some vegetables, perhaps a bit of fish or meat if you've been lucky, or if there's been a festival. You eat sitting on the floor, sharing food from common bowls. Conversation flows. What happened today? What needs to be done tomorrow? Any news from neighbors? Any gossip? Gossip in civilization serves the same function it did for hunter-gatherers. It's information sharing, social bonding, reputation management. But now there's more to gossip about. Who was seen with whom? Who's in debt? Who got in trouble with the authorities? Who's sick? Who died? After eating, there might be time for socializing. In villages, people gather in common areas. In cities, neighborhoods have their own gathering spots. Men might sit together, talking, playing games. Senet in Egypt, a board game with religious significance. The royal game of in Mesopotamia, one of the oldest known board games. These aren't just pastimes. They're social rituals, ways of bonding, establishing hierarchies, passing time. Women gather separately, often while continuing to work. Spinning, weaving, sewing. Always the hands are busy, but they talk, they sing, they share stories. Children play, though their games often mimic adult work. Boys play at hunting or soldiering. Girls play at housekeeping and childcare. Dolls and toys have been found in archaeological sites across the ancient world. Simple figurines, balls, miniature tools. Play is how children learn their roles. As darkness falls, activity winds down. Artificial light is expensive and weak. Oil lamps burning animal fat or olive oil provide a flickering, smoky light that's barely enough to see by. Most people simply go to sleep when it gets dark. There's no entertainment in the modern sense. No books for most people. No theaters yet, though in later civilizations there will be. No screens, no music on demand. Occasionally, there might be a festival. Religious festivals are major events in early civilizations, breaks from the grinding routine. There's feasting, music, dancing, processions. The gods are honored, sacrifices are made, and people are allowed, even encouraged, to celebrate. But these are infrequent. Most nights are quiet. You lie down on your mat, your family around you, the fire burning low. The sounds of the night are different from the Paleolithic. Instead of wild animals and wind, you hear other humans. Crying babies, coughing, snoring, conversations, arguments. You hear dogs barking, donkeys braying, rats scurrying. In cities, you're never alone, never in silence. Sleep comes, but it's not always restful. You might be awakened by a child, by animals, by the cold, by pests. Fleas, lice, bedbugs are constant companions. Disease is common. Parasitic infections from contaminated water. Respiratory infections from smoke and crowded conditions. Dental abscesses from gritty bread. Injuries from hard labor. Life expectancy is lower than it was for hunter-gatherers. The average might be 30 to 35 years, though if you survive childhood, you might make it to 50 or 60. Many people live with chronic pain, disability, illness. There's medicine, of course. Herbal remedies, some effective, some not. Priests who double as healers. In Egypt, there are specialized physicians, but much of it is based on trial and error, mixed with magic and prayer. Yet despite all of this, despite the hard work, the constraints, the hierarchy, the disease, the lack of freedom, people find meaning. They create art. In Mesopotamia, cylinder seals with intricate carvings. In Egypt, tomb paintings, jewelry, sculptures. In the Indus Valley, beautifully crafted pottery and tiny mysterious seals. They tell stories, epic tales like Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia, creation myths, flood stories, tales of gods and heroes. They make music, harps, lyres, flutes, drums. We have instruments from ancient Sumer, from Egypt. They compose songs, though most of the melodies are lost to time. They dance. They celebrate marriages, births, victories. They mourn deaths with elaborate funerals. They build monuments that will last thousands of years. The pyramids, the ziggurats, the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro. These aren't just feats of engineering. They're expressions of collective identity, belief, ambition, and they wonder. They look at the stars and create sophisticated astronomical systems. The Babylonians track the movements of planets, predict eclipses. The Egyptians align their pyramids with celestial bodies. They develop mathematics. In Mesopotamia, the sexagesimal system, base 60, which we still use for time and angles. In Egypt, geometry for surveying and building. They write. They create law codes like Hammurabi's Code in Mesopotamia, one of the earliest written legal systems. They compose hymns, prayers, medical texts, astronomical tables, administrative records. All of this, all of it, is built on the labor of ordinary people. People who wake up before dawn, work until sunset, eat simple food, sleep on hard floors, and do it all again the next day. People who will never see their names written in cuneiform or hieroglyphics, who will never be buried in elaborate tombs, whose bones will crumble into dust and be forgotten. But they were there. They lived. They loved. They struggled. They made civilization possible. As you lie there in the darkness of your mud brick house, 4,500 years ago, listening to your family breathe, feeling the ache in your muscles from a day in the fields, you might think about the stories the old ones tell, about the time before when people wandered and were free, but never sure where the next meal would come from. You might think about your children, about the life they'll inherit. Will they be farmers like you? Will they be conscripted to build a pyramid? Will they be lucky enough to learn a trade? Will they survive childhood? Or you might think about nothing at all. Just feel the warmth of the fire, the comfort of familiar sounds, the relief of being horizontal after a long day standing in the sun. Tomorrow will come. The fields will be waiting. The grain will need grinding. The gods will need appeasing. The king will want his taxes. Life will go on, the way it has for generations, the way it will for generations more. Until the civilization itself crumbles, conquered by invaders, or worn down by environmental change, or simply fading into the sands of time. But that's beyond your concern. Your world is smaller. Your family, your village, your fields, your daily bread, the rhythm of the seasons, the cycle of planting and harvest, birth and death. This is what daily life in early civilizations was actually like. Not the grand narratives of kings and conquests, but the quiet, grinding, essential work of ordinary people. People who made civilization possible and then were forgotten by it. So, what did early civilizations actually do all day? They worked. They worked harder and longer than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. They worked in fields under brutal sun, in workshops filled with smoke and heat, in houses grinding grain until their hands bled. They worked because they had to, because the alternative was starvation or punishment, because the system demanded it. But they also lived. They sang while they worked. They told stories around fires. They played games and made love and raised children. They created beauty in the margins of their exhausting days. They found meaning in rituals, in community, in the simple fact of survival. And here we are, thousands of years later, still asking the same questions. What is work for? What is life for? What have we gained and what have we lost? We don't work in fields anymore, most of us. We don't grind grain by hand or worry about whether the Nile will flood. We have technology that would seem like magic to an ancient Egyptian or Sumerian. We have medicine, literacy, leisure, freedom of movement. We live longer, eat better, suffer less from disease and injury. But we also work. We work in offices and factories, at screens and keyboards. We answer to bosses and schedules and systems that feel just as demanding, just as impersonal as the ancient king or temple collecting taxes. We feel the same exhaustion, the same sense of being caught in a system we didn't choose and can't escape. The technology changes. The fundamental human experience of working to survive, of trying to find meaning and joy in the midst of obligation, that remains. As you listen to this, as you drift toward sleep, you're doing something those ancient people did. You're resting. You're letting the day end. You're allowing your body and mind to recover so you can face another day. The details are different. You're not worried about whether the harvest will be good or whether raiders will come. You're worried about different things: bills, deadlines, relationships, health, the future. But underneath, it's the same human experience. The same need for rest, for safety, for connection, for something that makes the struggle worthwhile. If you've enjoyed this slow journey into the ancient world, you can gently tap, like so the algorithm knows to show you more. You can leave a comment if you'd like. Maybe tell us where in the world you're listening from, what your own daily rhythm looks like, whether you feel more like a hunter-gatherer or an early farmer in your modern life. If you want to walk with us regularly through these quiet corners of history, you can subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And if you feel moved to support the channel in a deeper way, there's the option to join as a member. That helps us make more of these long, gentle explorations. It's completely optional. Watching, listening, and resting with us is already more than enough. For now, you don't need to do anything at all. Just imagine this. The fire in your ancient house has burned down to deep, steady coals. Your family is asleep around you, breathing softly. Outside, the Nile flows as it always has, patient and eternal. Above, the same stars your ancestors saw, the same moon crossing the sky. 4,500 years ago, someone lay where you're lying now, in a mud brick house by a river, thinking about their day, their life, their children, their gods. They felt their muscles ache. They felt grateful for rest. They felt the simple, profound relief of being horizontal after a long day. Tonight, you share that same human need: to stop, to be safe, to let the mind loosen its grip on the day. The work can wait until morning. The emails, the tasks, the obligations, all of it can wait until morning. For now, you can rest under the same ancient sky, connected across millennia to everyone who has ever been tired, everyone who has ever worked, everyone who has ever closed their eyes and whispered, "Thanks for another day, survived, another night of peace." The harvest can wait. The king can wait. The gods can wait. For now, sleep.